A city born from a single man's dream and nearly erased from the face of the earth. For over 1,300 years, this city has been the beating heart of empires, the birthplace of human knowledge, and the target of the world's most ruthless conquerors. At its peak, Baghdad was the largest city on earth, a place where scientists solved equations that Europe wouldn't understand for 500 more years, where poets composed verses that still echo today, where the greatest library the world had ever seen stood open to anyone with a curious mind. Then came the blood, the fire, the bombs. Using advanced AI to breathe motion into forgotten manuscripts and long silent ruins, we won't just tell this story. You'll live it. From the ancient banks of the Tigris to the war-scarred streets of today, this is the entire history of Baghdad. Let's begin. Before Baghdad existed, this land already held the memory of civilization itself. This is Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The same soil where human beings first figured out how to build cities, write words, and organize governments. Thousands of years before Baghdad was even a thought, this ground was already sacred with history. Babylon rose here. Nineveh fell here. The Persians marched through here. Alexander the Great swept through here. Empires came, reached their peak, and crumbled one after another on this exact ground, Baghdad. Then, in 637 AD, everything changed again. Arab-Muslim forces defeated the Persian Sassanid Empire at the Battle of Qadisiyah. Islam swept across this land like wind across desert sand. The old Persian world was gone. A new world was being born. The Umayyad Caliphate rose and ruled from Damascus. But within a century, a revolution was coming. A new dynasty was ready to take power, and they didn't just want a capital. They wanted to build the greatest city the world had ever seen. Centuries of empires had already risen and fallen on this ground. But nothing prepared the world for what came next. Baghdad wasn't discovered. It wasn't inherited. It was designed from scratch in the mind of one man. His name was Caliph al-Mansur, the second ruler of the Abbasid dynasty. He had just overthrown the Umayyads and needed a capital worthy of his ambition. Damascus was too connected to the old regime. He needed something new, something his. In 762 AD, he rode along the Tigris River personally scouting locations. When he arrived at a small village called Baghdad, he stopped. The climate was perfect. The river provided water and trade routes. It sat at the crossroads of the Persian heartland and the Arab world. Al-Mansur made his decision on the spot. He commissioned the construction of what he called Madinat al-Salam, the City of Peace. And here is what made it unlike anything that had ever been built before. It was a perfect circle. Imagine a city designed like a wheel. At the very center, the Caliph's palace with its iconic green dome visible for miles. Then rings of administrative buildings, markets, and housing. 4 gates pointing in 4 directions toward Khorasan, Basra, Syria, and Kufa. Every road led to the palace. The entire city was a message. All roads, all power, all civilization leads here. To build it, Al-Mansur brought in an estimated 100,000 workers, architects. The entire city was completed in just 4 years. By 766 AD, Baghdad was open. It was unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. Al-Mansur built the bones of Baghdad. His grandson would give it a soul. For 2 centuries, Baghdad was the most important city on earth, not just politically, not just economically, intellectually. The man who turned Baghdad into a legend was Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who came to power in 786 AD under his rule. Baghdad's population exploded to over 1 million people, making it the largest city in the world at that time. Its markets stretched for miles, its mosques gleamed, its streets buzzed with merchants from China, India, Africa, and Europe. But the most extraordinary thing about Harun al-Rashid's Baghdad wasn't its size. It was what happened inside a single building, Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Imagine the greatest library and research institution the world had ever seen. Scholars from every corner of the known world, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians worked side by side translating Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, Hippocrates, works that Europe had already forgotten, preserved, studied, and expanded upon in Baghdad. A mathematician named Al-Khwarizmi worked here. He invented algebra. The word algorithm comes from his name. Without his work in that building, modern computers would not exist. Ibn al-Haytham was developing the foundations of optics, figuring out how human vision works, 600 years before European scientists would catch up. Surgeons in Baghdad were performing operations using techniques that wouldn't appear in European medicine for centuries. If you lived in Baghdad in the year 900 AD, you had access to more books, more ideas, and more scientific knowledge than any human being anywhere else on the planet. While European cities were small, dark, and largely illiterate, Baghdad had street lighting, running water systems, and over 100 book dealers. There were pharmacies, hospitals, and schools. The city even had a system for licensing doctors. You couldn't practice medicine in Baghdad without passing an examination, and then there were the stories. The tales being told in the coffee houses and courtyards of Baghdad would eventually be collected into one of the most famous books in human history, 1001 Nights. Scheherazada's stories were born in the alleyways of this city. While Europe couldn't read, Baghdad was rewriting the laws of the universe. But brilliance attracts enemies, and Baghdad's greatest danger wasn't coming from outside. It was rotting from within. They collapsed slowly, decision by decision, caliph by caliph, until one day you look around and realize the greatness is gone. By the 10th century, the Abbasid caliphs were losing their grip. The empire was simply too large to control from one city. Governors in distant provinces began acting independently. The caliph's authority, once absolute, was becoming ceremonial. The real power had shifted to the Turkish soldiers who guarded the palace. These military commanders, called emirs, were the ones actually running Baghdad. The caliph still sat on the golden throne. He still wore the prophet's cloak. He still issued decrees. But he was a puppet, and everyone knew it. Then in 945 AD, the Ubayd dynasty marched into Baghdad and took control. A Persian Shia family ruling a Sunni Abbasid caliphate. The caliph was kept alive as a religious figurehead, but real governance was in Persian hands. It was humiliating. Then came the Seljuk Turks in 1055, then other factions, then floods, then famines. The House of Wisdom was neglected. Scholars left. The great translation movement slowed. The libraries gathered dust. The caliph still sat on the throne. But the throne meant nothing. If internal chaos wasn't enough, a storm was gathering on the horizon. And this storm would change Baghdad forever. 1258 AD, the single worst week in Baghdad's history, perhaps in the entire history of human civilization. His name was Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan. He had already obliterated Persia. He had already destroyed cities that took centuries to build. Now he stood at the gates of Baghdad, with an army estimated at 150,000 soldiers, one of the largest military forces ever assembled in the medieval world. The caliph at the time was al-Mustasim. His advisors told him to surrender. They told him the city couldn't hold. He refused. Perhaps he believed God would protect the center of the Islamic world. He was wrong. The Mongols breached the walls on February 10, 1258. What followed was not a battle. It was an extermination. For 7 days, the Mongols killed, burned, and destroyed everything they touched. Historians estimate that between 200,000 and 800,000 people were slaughtered. Mosques, palaces, and markets reduced to rubble and ash. The House of Wisdom was destroyed. Every book, every manuscript, every scientific text, either burned or thrown into the Tigris River. Centuries of accumulated human knowledge gone in a week. They say the Tigris ran black with ink and red with blood. Caliph al-Mustasim was captured. The Mongols, who believed shedding royal blood would bring a curse, wrapped him in a rug and had horses trample him to death. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled for 5 centuries, ended in a rug on the banks of the Tigris. Baghdad was left a ghost town. A city that had held 1 million people was now a field of ruins and bones. Some historians argue that the Mongol invasion of Baghdad was the single greatest civilizational catastrophe of the medieval world, more damaging to human progress than the fall of Rome, more total in its destruction than any plague. The Golden Age didn't fade, it was murdered. But Baghdad was not finished. It would never be as great again. But it refused to disappear. A city that survives the Mongols can survive anything. Recovery was slow, painful. Decades passed before Baghdad resembled anything like a functioning city again. The population had been reduced from 1 million to perhaps a few tens of thousands. The grand circular city was gone. What was being rebuilt was humbler, smaller, scarred. Then, in 1347, the Black Death arrived. As the plague swept across Asia and Europe, Baghdad, already weakened, took another devastating blow. Then in 1401, Timur, also known as Tamerlane, arrived. Another conqueror from Central Asia. Another siege. Another massacre. Baghdad was sacked for the second time in 150 years. The survivors must have wondered if their city was cursed. Then came a new conflict, the Persian Safavid Empire and the Ottoman Empire battling for control of the city. Baghdad changed hands multiple times throughout the 16th and early 17th centuries. Finally, in 1638, Ottoman Sultan Murad IV captured Baghdad and signed a peace treaty with Persia. Baghdad would remain under Ottoman rule for nearly 3 centuries. Under the Ottomans, Baghdad had stability, but not glory. The city became a provincial backwater. The grand boulevards were not rebuilt. The libraries were not restocked. The scholars did not return. If you walked through Baghdad in the year 1700, you would never believe this was once the greatest city on earth. But beneath the surface, Baghdad's identity was still alive. The people remembered. And the 20th century was about to drag Baghdad violently, chaotically, into the modern world. World War I didn't just kill millions of soldiers. It killed empires. And when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the maps of the entire Middle East were redrawn, not by the people who lived there, but by British and French diplomats sitting in European offices. British forces captured Baghdad in March 1917. After the war, Britain created Iraq, a country that had never existed before, by combining three very different Ottoman provinces: Mosul in the north, Baghdad in the center, and Basra in the south. Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds, three groups with different histories and different identities, forced together inside artificial borders drawn with a European ruler. Streets were modernized, schools opened, and beneath the desert ground, oil was being discovered in enormous quantities. Suddenly, the entire world cared very much about what happened in Iraq. Iraq gained formal independence in 1932, but British influence remained deep. Then, in 1958, a group of Iraqi military officers overthrew the monarchy in a single night. King Faisal II, just 23 years old, was assassinated. The British era was over. A republic was declared. A country drawn by foreigners, ruled by outsiders, sitting on the world's most valuable resource. The explosion was always coming. Baghdad in the 1970s was a city of genuine hope. Oil money was flowing. Universities were being built. Women were attending colleges in large numbers. The literacy rate was rising. Iraq had one of the most educated populations in the Arab world, but hope in Baghdad has always had a short lifespan. The Ba'ath Party seized power in a coup in 1968, and within that party, one man was steadily, quietly, brutally consolidating control. His name was Saddam Hussein. By 1979, he had total, absolute, unquestioned power. In his first act as president, he convened a meeting of Ba'ath Party leaders and read out a list of names. Those named were led out of the room. Most were executed within days. The message was clear: loyalty or death. Loyalty or death. In 1980, Saddam launched an invasion of Iran, a catastrophic decision that dragged Iraq into an 8-year war that killed hundreds of thousands on both sides. Then in 1990, Saddam invaded Kuwait. The Gulf War of 1991 ended with Iraq's forces expelled, but Saddam remained in power. Brutal UN sanctions were imposed. Baghdad's middle class was crushed. Doctors were selling furniture to buy food. Engineers drove taxis. An entire generation grew up in poverty and isolation. Then came September 11th, 2001, and the chain of events that followed would once again bring foreign armies to the gates of Baghdad. On March 20th, 2003, the United States and its allies launched the invasion of Iraq. On April 9th, 2003, American forces entered central Baghdad. In Firdos Square, a statue of Saddam Hussein was pulled down. An era had ended. But what came after the fall, no one was prepared for. Liberation and destruction can look exactly the same. The American-led invasion dismantled Saddam's government, but it had no real plan for what came next. The Iraqi army was dissolved overnight, putting hundreds of thousands of armed, trained, unemployed men on the streets. Government ministries were looted. The National Museum was looted. Ancient artifacts, some from the very dawn of civilization, were stolen and scattered across the world. Baghdad descended into chaos, and into that chaos stepped the ancient fault line of Iraqi society, the division between Sunni and Shia Muslims. Old grievances exploded into violence, militias formed. Death squads operated. Bodies appeared on Baghdad streets every morning. If you lived in Baghdad in 2006, you didn't know if your neighbor was your protector or your killer. You didn't know if the checkpoint at the end of your street was manned by government soldiers or a sectarian death squad. Baghdad was divided into sectarian enclaves separated by concrete blast walls. 2 Bagdads, 2 realities, side by side. By 2007, the city was on the edge of full civil war. The surge gradually reduced the violence. But scars do not heal quickly. Then, in 2014, ISIS swept across northern and western Iraq with terrifying speed. Baghdad braced for another siege. But this time, the city held. A coalition of forces pushed back. Mosul was liberated in 2017 after a brutal 9-month battle. ISIS was defeated as a territorial force. Baghdad had survived again. Barely, exhausted, traumatized, but standing. Today, Baghdad is rebuilding. Again, as it always has. Walk along Mutanabi Street, the historic street of booksellers in the old city, and you will find it alive again. Vendors spread their books on the ground. Intellectuals argue over coffee. Young people browse poetry collections. The street was bombed in 2007, killing dozens. It was rebuilt. The books came back. Baghdad's cafe culture is returning. Young Iraqis who grew up knowing nothing but war and sanctions are opening art galleries, coffee shops, and small businesses. The city that once produced the world's greatest scientists is producing a new generation that is quietly, stubbornly, defiantly rebuilding. But the challenges are enormous. Corruption is deeply embedded in every level of government. The infrastructure, water, electricity, sewage, is crumbling after decades of war and neglect. In summer, temperatures in Baghdad regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius, and power cuts mean air conditioning fails for hours every day. Climate change is slowly turning the fertile land of Mesopotamia into desert. Young Iraqis protested in their millions in 2019, demanding basic services and an end to corruption, and were met with bullets. Hundreds were killed. But they kept coming back to the streets. Baghdad is a city still asking a profound question. After everything, who do we want to be? Baghdad isn't just a city, it's proof of something. Proof that human beings, no matter how many times they are conquered, burned, or bombed, will always come back and build again. This city gave the world algebra. It gave us the foundations of modern medicine, astronomy, and literature. It was the beating heart of the Islamic Golden Age, a civilization so advanced that Europe would not catch up for 500 years. Then it was destroyed by Mongols, by Tamerlane, by Ottomans, by colonizers, by dictators, by foreign armies, by its own people tearing themselves apart. And every single time, Baghdad came back. Not perfectly, not completely. The House of Wisdom is gone and cannot be rebuilt. The circular city of Al-Manzur exists only in the imagination. The Golden Age of Harun al-Rashid belongs to history books. But Baghdad is still here, on the banks of the same Tigris River, where one man once stood and dreamed of the perfect city. Paris taught us that cities endure. Baghdad proves that cities are immortal. If this journey moved you, if Baghdad's story stayed with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Because there are 1,000 more cities with stories just as powerful, just as dark, and just as extraordinary. And as always, we'll see you in the past.